Eddard Stark stood on the banks of the Trident, blood staining the shallows, the river's current coursing around the bodies of the fallen. He was not wounded, at least, not so that anyone could see. But he felt a sharp ache in his chest, as though grief itself had dealt him a mortal blow. The wind carried the metallic scent of blood, and the sharper tang of sweat-soaked fear. Horses reared and snorted, their hooves churning up mud on the riverbank. Somewhere behind him came the groan of a wounded man calling for his mother. Eddard wanted to turn away from it all and let the waters wash away the horrors, but duty gripped him as surely as any chain around his neck. He could still see the final, terrible moments. Robert's warhammer raised high, its surface gleaming with the residue of gore. The roar that tore from his friend's throat, like a challenge to the gods themselves. He could see Rhaegar Targaryen's armor, that famous black plate inlaid with rubies, the dragon's sigil dancing with each measured movement. Time had slowed in those few heartbeats. Robert lunged. Rhaegar deflected the warhammer. Robert struck again, his ferocity fueled by all the grief and rage that had festered since the day he learned of Lyanna's abduction. But Rhaegar's skill was no small thing. He had not come to the Trident to lose. His strength had been underestimated so many times that men thought Robert all but unstoppable. They had whispered that Robert's fury would break the Dragon Prince. They had told tales of how House Targaryen's day was done. Then Rhaegar's sword had found its mark. Eddard saw Robert's eyes widen, maybe in pain, maybe in disbelieving shock. Blood erupted from a mortal wound in his chest. Rhaegar twisted his blade, withdrawing it with a harsh sound. Robert's warhammer dropped from his hands. He tumbled forward, landing heavily in the shallow water. No cry escaped him then. He simply lay there, the water turning red. Eddard remembered screaming his friend's name. He remembered surging forth in a reckless rage, blade in hand. But men pressed him back, more Targaryen soldiers than he could count. A swirl of cloaks, a flash of spears. Rhaegar's Kingsguard closed the space, shielding their prince. A hush had fallen across the battlefield then, even with the river streaming by. The rebels, as many called them, Dard among them, had watched their unspoken leader fall. And everything changed in that moment. Now, in the calm that followed, Eddard stood ankle-deep in blood-stained water, holding Robert's body with trembling hands. The weight of it was too real, the flesh still warm. He laid his friend on a patch of grass near the river, his eyes stinging with tears. A few men clustered behind him. Many bore the direwolf of House Stark or the falcon of House Arryn on their tabards. Though caked mud and grime made those emblems hard to see, they said nothing. Words would have been an affront to the hush of death that lingered in the air. Rhaegar Targaryen stood a short distance away. Sword in hand, the blade red and wet. Sweat dampened his silver hair. But there was a steadiness to him, a resolute calm that suggested he had fully accepted the task he had been born to do, to protect his family's claim at any cost. Rubies glimmered across his breastplate, each one catching the wan sunlight that broke through the clouds. His eyes fixed on Eddard, yet he did not speak either. Instead, he took a step forward, as if to confirm that Robert Baratheon truly lay dead, and that it was not some conjurer's trick. Eddard felt a deep instinct to defend Robert's remains, though it seemed a futile gesture now. The knights of the Kingsguard fanned around Rhaegar. Sir Barristan Selmy, armor dented but stance unbowed, and the tall, silent Arthur Dayne, his dawn-white cloak stained with the day's slaughter. Eddard clenched his jaw but did not rise. He knelt beside Robert, pressing a hand to his friend's forehead as though he could offer comfort, even in death. The breeze turned cold, rustling leaves along the shore, and Eddard felt that chill sink into his bones. He heard men behind him weeping, and men behind them gritting their teeth. The battle, for all intents and purposes, was over. They had come to the Trident for a decisive victory, had believed the might of the Stormlands, the North, and the Vale combined would be unstoppable. Yet Prince Rhaegar, outmaneuvering them with cunning and the royal army's discipline, had stood firm. The rebels' great hammer was broken, lying limp and lifeless in Eddard's arms. He heard a voice call his name. It was Lord Jon Arryn, who approached with a cluster of weary knights. His silver hair was disheveled, face smeared with grime and concern. When he reached Eddard, he sank to his knees at Robert's side, his breath catching. Without words, his gaze flickered to Rhaegar, then to the body, and back again. Jon whispered Robert's name. Then, regaining some composure, he addressed Eddard as softly as he could. "We must make a choice," he said. "If we fight them now, we die." Eddard did not answer, but he slowly let his gaze rove over the field. He saw Targaryen banners swaying in the breeze. A sea of black and red, living men who stood watchful, waiting for the next command. He saw so few men wearing the colors of the rebel houses, unbloodied or unbroken. More had died this day than he could count, and more still nursed wounds. Surrender was a word Eddard had never imagined would pass his lips. Not with Robert still leading them. Not while the memory of Lyanna's captivity still burned in his mind. But to fight was to invite a slaughter of the last good men who stood with him. He looked up at Rhaegar, who met his eyes. In that mirrored sorrow, Eddard realized that they both grieved, though for different reasons. Perhaps Rhaegar wept for fallen knights, for the realm. Perhaps there was regret too. But remorse would not bring Robert back. Neither would it spare the men who still lived. A memory of Robert's boisterous laugh flickered through Eddard's mind, giving him a pang of loss so intense that he had to steady himself on the grass. When Eddard spoke, his voice was low. "If I kneel," he said to Jon, "what becomes of us?" Jon Arryn's face tightened. "I fear the worst. But we must place our hopes on the mercy of the crown. Whether that hope is wise, only the gods know." Eddard turned again and met Rhaegar's gaze. Finally, with all the resolve that remained in him, he rose from the ground, letting Robert's head gently rest back. He strode forward. At his approach, the Kingsguard tensed. Swords shifted in mailed hands. Eddard went down on one knee before the prince. The knights of the realm, those who had survived the day, witnessed Ned Stark bowing. A hush swept through them all. A hush as profound as the moment Robert fell. Eddard's voice shook with grief as he addressed Prince Rhaegar. "I yield," he said. "I, Eddard Stark of Winterfell, do bend the knee." He heard faint sobs behind him, perhaps from the men who loved Robert, or from those who realized that everything they had fought for, believed in, and sacrificed for was slipping away. He waited for Rhaegar to speak, wondering if the words would be bitter or triumphant. Yet, when Rhaegar answered, his voice was measured, almost gentle. "Rise," said the Dragon Prince. "We shall see to your wounded. We shall see to the fallen. The realm has bled enough." Eddard stood slowly. He looked over his shoulder. He saw that Jon Arryn had also knelt, and so had many others. Together, they rose to face the future. A future without Robert Baratheon. Days passed in a gray haze as the battered armies reorganized. Eddard found himself in an unfamiliar role, that of captive. Perhaps in a strict sense he was not yet bound by chains, but he and the other lords who had rebelled were placed under close watch by Targaryen loyalists. Even so, Eddard could see that Rhaegar was no mad tyrant. The prince made sure that the wounded were tended to, offering what resources he could to men who had, mere days before, been his enemies. The soldiers wore the red dragon banners and built funeral pyres for the dead, offering no cruel taunts. It was as though the tragedy of Robert's death had cast a somber pall over everyone, loyalist and rebel alike. Eddard spent his time moving among his own men, comforting them, ensuring that the badly wounded were given what care was possible. Jon Arryn remained near him, conferring quietly at every turn. In the mornings, a damp mist rose off the river, clinging to the tents and the makeshift pavilions set up on the fields. Eddard slept little, haunted by dreams of Robert's final moment. He woke often, sweat cooling on his brow. The image of that mortal blow burned into his vision. He told himself that he still lived for one reason: his family in the north. He had to return to Winterfell and protect them, no matter what vow he had been forced to make in the field. He prayed to the old gods, though the southern skies had no weirwood trees with faces to watch him. He prayed for guidance, for the strength not to shatter under the weight of defeat. He prayed for Lyanna, whose fate remained uncertain. Rhaegar had taken her, that much was true. Whether she was alive and well or something worse weighed heavily in Eddard's mind. If the Targaryens were to show mercy, then Eddard prayed it would extend to his sister as well. On the 5th day, word came that the prince had summoned Eddard and Jon Arryn to his command tent at dusk. Eddard took that afternoon to walk alone by the river's edge, ignoring the watchful eyes of Targaryen sentries nearby. The water was calmer now, carrying driftwood downstream. He thought about Robert's body, which had been given a pyre. The Stormland soldiers had stood vigil. Men had thrown themselves upon the ground, weeping for their lord, cursing the Targaryens with each breath. Eddard had stood apart, unable to speak. Now he felt the press of those memories bearing down like a heavy cloak. Too many regrets, too many questions without answers. What if he had intervened sooner? What if he had insisted on a different strategy? When the sun began to sink, Eddard returned to his tent. Jon Arryn was already there, straightening his tunic and smoothing his thinning hair. The older man looked up, his eyes pained. They exchanged no words. Together, they made their way across the camp to the prince's pavilion, flanked by Targaryen guards carrying spears. Torches burned outside, lending an eerie glow to the dusk. Inside, the air was heavy with incense. Rhaegar waited at a table strewn with maps of the realm. Sir Arthur Dayne stood to his right, and Sir Barristan to his left. A few others were present, high lords who had remained loyal to the crown. They watched Eddard and Jon Arryn with unreadable expressions. Rhaegar motioned for them to stand on the opposite side of the table. He regarded them quietly. In the flickering light, his face seemed drawn. The final confrontation with Robert had drained him, Eddard realized, even if he tried not to show it. "There will be terms," Rhaegar said softly. "House Stark, House Arryn, and all other families who rose against the crown must submit. But there must also be some measure of reconciliation. The realm has lost too many good men." Eddard squared his shoulders, bracing for the worst. "What do you ask of us, my prince?" He tried to keep his tone neutral. Rhaegar did not strike him as a cruel man, but the Targaryens had known cruelty before. And father or son, king or prince, the Iron Throne had a way of corrupting mercy. "The war is done," Rhaegar said. "Your men will lay down their arms. You and Lord Arryn will return to your lands, under strict conditions. You will swear fealty anew to my father, King Aerys, and to me as his heir. Treason will not be tolerated." Nah. Eddard felt a surge of bitter anger at the mention of the Mad King, but he kept his face as still as he could. "And if we swear it?" he asked. "We may go free." "That is the intent," Rhaegar answered. "But for as long as my father reigns, there will be distrust. Too much blood has been spilled. You and Lord Arryn will be watched. And I must also speak with you about your sister." Eddard's heart thumped. "Where is Lyanna?" he asked. For a moment, Rhaegar's gaze fell to the table. A shadow of sorrow crossed his features. "She is in Dorne, at the Tower of Joy, under the protection of the King's Guard." Eddard felt an impulse to grip the hilt of his sword, but he forced himself to remain calm. "Bring her back," he said. "She belongs with her family." A flicker of conflict showed in Rhaegar's eyes, but he only nodded. "She is my wife in the eyes of the Seven," he said quietly. "We wed in secret. I will not lie to you, Lord Stark, for these matters can no longer be hidden. I love your sister. I will protect her. But the king, my father, wishes her to remain out of sight until the dust of this rebellion settles." "That's Salamo." Eddard clenched his jaw. It felt as if every muscle in his body drew tight. He heard Jon Arryn shift beside him but say nothing. "Lyanna did not ask for any of this," Eddard said. "I know," Rhaegar answered. "But it is done. In time, I hope you will see that she is not a prisoner. For now, the best way to keep her safe is to ensure that bloodshed ceases." Eddard's mind spun with questions, with anger, with heartbreak. He thought of Robert, who had fought and died in large part because of Lyanna. Now she was wed to the man who had spirited her away. Eddard could not fathom how she could be content. But if there was any chance she was alive, he had to ensure that no more of his men died for a cause that was already lost. He gave Rhaegar a curt nod. "I will bend the knee to the crown," he said, each word tasting of bile. "And I will keep the North in line." At that, Jon Arryn cleared his throat. "The Vale will also submit," he said. "But we ask for fair treatment. For ourselves, and for our people." Rhaegar's voice was softer now, more measured. "I do not relish punishing the realm. I wish only for peace. On the morrow you will kneel before my father. If he spares you, I shall do all in my power to ensure the realm heals. We will return to King's Landing, and from there each of you will go to your lands as vassals of the crown once again." He folded his hands together and looked down at the maps. Perhaps he saw future battles in those lines, or the potential for more bloodshed. Then he dismissed them with a quiet word. Eddard left the pavilion feeling hollow, as though he had lost something far greater than a war. He had lost his faith in the world's fairness. He had lost his illusions about the unstoppable Robert Baratheon. Now came the question of how to live in the new world Rhaegar was forging. The next day, Eddard and Jon Arryn were escorted to the city of King's Landing with a train of Targaryen banners surrounding them on the roads. The journey was slow and somber, a far cry from the triumphant marches they had once imagined leading. The common folk watched them pass with wide, fearful eyes. Rumors must have swept through the countryside that the rebellion had ended. Some onlookers cheered for the Targaryens, grateful that the war would not visit their doorsteps. Others stared at Eddard and Jon in stony silence. Perhaps they had prayed for a Baratheon victory, or perhaps they were simply uncertain what new troubles might come. At night, Eddard found it difficult to sleep. The winding roads, the stops to water the horses, the Targaryen guards never letting him too far out of sight, these things wore him down. He tried to cling to thoughts of Winterfell, of the quiet Godswood and the ancient crypts beneath the castle. He ached for the cold of the north, for the thick pines and the swirling snow. This southern heat felt oppressive, pressing down on him like a wet blanket. One evening, while the Targaryen escort made camp near a cluster of old pine trees, Eddard pulled Jon Arryn aside. They walked a short distance from the tents, feigning a need for fresh air. Guards trailed at a discreet distance. Eddard could hear the crackle of campfires and the quiet murmurs of men at rest. He spoke in a hushed tone, but anger edged his words. "We have no choice but to kneel," he said. "But if the king means to punish us in ways Rhaegar will not stop, then the realm might yet burn. The Mad King has never been reasonable. Rhaegar may want peace, but his father has shown cruelty beyond measure." Jon pressed his lips together, pausing a moment to consider his response. "We do what we must," he said. "If Aerys does order our heads, then may the gods have mercy on our lands. But Rhaegar has promised to protect us. Perhaps the prince can reason with his father, or at least contain him." Eddard exhaled slowly, looking past Jon at the silhouettes of the Targaryen guards. One step too far, and spears would come for them. "We must hold on to what hope we can," Eddard replied. "If we can save our lands, our people, we must." They returned to the camp in silence. That night, Eddard slept only fitfully, dreaming of a white wolf howling in the cold night air. King's Landing rose from the distance like a swollen sore, walled and crowded, the waters of Blackwater Bay catching the light. Eddard remembered the last time he had come here. The city had seemed grand, the castle imposing. Now it felt like a threat. Smoke from 1,000 chimneys drifted into the sky. The closer they got, the stronger the stench of waste, rot, and fear. When they arrived, the people in the streets parted for the Targaryen retinue, the red dragon banners fluttering in the breeze. Soldiers lined the roads, ensuring that no riot or rebellion could spark again. The Red Keep loomed above the city, perched on its hill. Eddard entered through the gates to find a massive gathering of lords and ladies. The courtyard was alive with a mixture of tension and curiosity. Men whispered as Eddard and Jon dismounted, their clothes dusty from travel, their faces guarded. Eddard noticed that few greeted them warmly. He saw those who had stayed loyal, Lords Tyrell and Redwyne from the Reach, Lord Greyjoy from the Iron Islands, the Martells from Dorne. Some regarded Eddard with suspicion, others with aloof politeness. They were ushered deeper into the keep, through long corridors draped with Targaryen banners. At last, they entered the throne room. The Iron Throne stood at the far end, its twisted swords gleaming in the torchlight. Atop it, King Aerys slouched, his hair wild and thinning, his fingernails grown long and yellowed. His eyes shone with a feverish brightness. Eddard had seen the man only briefly in the past, but rumor had carried tales of the king's madness far and wide. Standing to the side, Prince Rhaegar looked composed, yet Eddard noted the faint lines of tension in the prince's posture. The weight of his father's unpredictability must sit heavily on him. With the eyes of the court upon them, Eddard and Jon strode forward until they were but a few paces from the throne. They knelt, heads bowed. Eddard felt his jaw tighten with the effort to keep his expression neutral. He heard the rustle of clothing as the court shifted and craned to see better. The king's voice grated through the air. "Eddard Stark," he said, savoring the name like a curse. "Lord of Winterfell. And Jon Arryn, Lord of the Eyrie." A slow, low laugh bubbled up from his chest. "You led a rebellion against me, daring to question the rightful rule of House Targaryen. And now you kneel. Have you come to beg forgiveness?" "Then down her." Eddard kept his gaze on the cold stone floor. "Yes, your grace," he replied in a steady tone. "For the sake of the realm, we bend the knee, we lay down arms, we offer you our fealty." Aerys said nothing at first. The silence lasted long enough for Eddard to fear the worst. He did not dare lift his head to look at Jon Arryn or Rhaegar. At last, the king rose. Eddard could hear the sharp creak of metal as he descended from the throne. "So many traitors," Aerys muttered, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous hall. "Robert Baratheon was your friend, was he not? Killed by my son's hand, yes, a better end than he deserved." He moved closer. Eddard could sense the man's presence behind him. The hair on the back of his neck prickled. "Should I spare your life, Lord Stark? Or should I have your head spiked upon the walls, a lesson to those who defy me? What do you think, my dear Rhaegar?" For a moment, the tension in the hall grew almost tangible. Eddard braced himself for a blow or a word that might signal his doom. Then Rhaegar spoke, calm but resolute. "Father, our realm has endured too much killing. Robert Baratheon is dead. The rebellion has ended. I have given Lord Stark and Lord Arryn my word that if they submit, they shall have mercy. I beg you, let us not break our word and plunge the Seven Kingdoms further into chaos." "Nandy." Aerys breathed heavily, and for a moment, Eddard thought he might lash out at his own son. Then the king barked a harsh laugh. "Beg, do you? A prince of the realm, begging, the times we live in." He paused and his voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "Very well, I will spare their lives. But traitors must not go unpunished entirely. Lord Stark, your father died for his treason. Your brother too. Perhaps you should be thankful you still draw breath." "Then you know." Eddard swallowed. "I am thankful, your grace." The king pivoted, his robes swirling. "Lord Arryn, you sheltered these rebels in the Vale. You defied your oath. Should I strip you of your title and lands?" Again he paused, letting the question hang. Eddard risked a glance sideways. Jon Arryn's face was pale, but his head remained bowed. "No," said Aerys with a bitter sneer. "You shall keep your Eyrie, but let this be your final warning. You will lose more than your head if ever you betray me again." "Nadin shall." Rhaegar cleared his throat, perhaps to steer the moment away from the edge of madness. "Father, let the realm see that we can show mercy. Lord Stark and Lord Arryn will make public vows of loyalty to be witnessed by all gathered here. Then, if you permit, they may return to their lands." Aerys considered this. The hush in the throne room stretched. Finally, the king let out a rasping breath. "Yes. Yes. Let us see them speak their vows. Then I shall be done with them." He returned to the throne and settled onto the jagged metal seat. "Rise, traitors, and speak your peace." Eddard stood, his head swimming with relief and hatred intertwined. Jon Arryn rose beside him, stoic as ever. They turned to face the assembled court, which now formed a living tapestry of curious eyes. Eddard saw the Tyrells, the Lannisters, the Martells, and the Redwine Lords, all watching closely. This was a spectacle of power, and Eddard knew it. He forced himself to keep his voice firm as he recited the words he had once believed he would never say. "I, Eddard Stark, Lord of Winterfell and Warden of the North, do hereby swear fealty to King Aerys Targaryen, the second of his name, and to his rightful heir, Prince Rhaegar Targaryen. I lay down my arms and pledge the loyalty of House Stark to the Iron Throne. May the gods bear witness." Jon Arryn echoed those sentiments. When he finished, a ripple of murmurs passed through the courtiers. Prince Rhaegar nodded solemnly, and Sir Barristan gave a faint sigh, as though relieved some bloodshed might yet be averted. King Aerys drummed his long nails against the arm of the throne. "Good," he declared in a mocking tone. "Good. Now be gone from my sight." It was done. Yet Eddard felt no triumph in being spared. He felt only a deep, abiding loss. As he left the throne room, he caught Rhaegar's gaze. The prince gave a small nod, which Eddard took as a gesture of uneasy alliance. The path to peace might be uncertain, but for now they had reached the end of one bloody chapter. The next lay in wait, dark and full of unknown perils. Days turned into weeks as Eddard and Jon Arryn were temporarily lodged within the Red Keep, awaiting final permissions to depart. Eddard learned, through overheard bits of conversation, that Tywin Lannister had once considered which side to back, but had chosen neutrality, waiting to see who would emerge victorious. Some rumored that House Lannister would seek favor now that the rebellion had ended, perhaps with marriage alliances or lavish gifts. Eddard paid little attention. He kept to himself, restless, longing to return north. Occasionally, Rhaegar would send a messenger to request Eddard's presence for a brief conversation. Always polite yet constrained, the prince seemed earnest in his desire to prevent the kingdom from collapsing into more violence. But even he could not hide the tension between himself and his father. Eddard saw it in the set of Rhaegar's jaw, the worry etched in his brow. On a rare afternoon when the sun bathed the Red Keep's gardens with warmth, Eddard stood near a rosebush, gazing at the city's rooftops. The hustle and bustle below felt far removed from the tragedy of the battlefield. People lived their lives, bartering fish, gambling in alleyways, gossiping about the doings in court. Eddard's thoughts drifted to Winterfell. To the cool air, the hot springs, the sense of home. He wished he could be among the pine forests again, as far from King's Landing as possible. A voice startled him. Prince Rhaegar, approaching quietly. "Lord Stark," he said, inclining his head. "You seem lost in thought." Eddard managed a small, wary nod. "These are uncertain times, my prince." Rhaegar folded his hands behind his back. A breeze lifted a stray lock of silver hair. "I would speak with you about the future," he said. "We have made it clear that you will remain Warden of the North. But conditions must be upheld. My father demands absolute loyalty, and I must ask you to keep the peace." "Oh." Eddard clenched his teeth, but he stilled his anger. "You have my loyalty, for as long as I breathe. If only to spare my men more bloodshed." Rhaegar seemed to weigh those words. "I know you do not forgive me for Robert's death. You will likely never forgive. I do not blame you. Still, I would ask if there can be something like understanding between us. The realm cannot afford another war." Eddard looked away, mind drifting to Robert's final moments once more. That single strike had changed the course of history. Finally, Eddard said, "Understanding is not the same as forgiveness, but I will do what I must to protect the North." Rhaegar nodded slowly. "That is enough. I will see that my father allows you to leave for Winterfell within the fortnight. Lord Arryn will depart for the Vale as well. The lords of the realm must see that there is unity once more." For a moment, neither spoke. The garden's fragrance was cloying, almost suffocating for a man used to crisp northern air. Eddard broke the silence. "What of my sister?" Rhaegar's mouth tightened. "I would have her join me here in King's Landing once I have settled the unrest. She is my wife, and I will not hide her away forever. But for now, my father thinks it wise to keep her in Dorne. He fears that other lords might question the legitimacy of our union, especially given the circumstances." Eddard felt a cold fury coil in his stomach. Lyanna, a pawn in this precarious game, forcibly kept from her family. The vow he had made not to rise in arms weighed heavily on him. He could do little to help her now without risking thousands of lives. "She is a Stark," he said, his voice low. "Do not forget that." "I will not," Rhaegar answered. Then, with a half-bow, the prince took his leave. Within a few days, a royal decree was issued permitting Eddard Stark and Jon Arryn to depart the Red Keep for their own domains. The king demanded that they remain in close correspondence, and Targaryen garrisons would keep watch on both the north and the Vale, a precaution, no doubt, to nip any new rebellion in the bud. Eddard accepted this indignity without complaint. The moment he was free of King's Landing, he rode north with a heavy escort of Targaryen soldiers alongside a fraction of his own men who had survived. The journey back felt interminable. As they crossed the neck, Eddard breathed the marshy air, feeling more at home with each step toward the north. The Targaryen soldiers grumbled about the cold nights. Eddard found some grim satisfaction in their discomfort. He said little to them, keeping his own counsel. Along the way, he stopped in small holdfasts to speak with local lords, ensuring they understood the outcome of the war. The Mad King still sat upon the Iron Throne, but the true power was Prince Rhaegar, who had proven his mettle on the battlefield. Some accepted this new reality with resignation. Others seethed with unspoken resentment. At Moat Cailin, the ancient stronghold that guarded the entrance to the north, Eddard dismissed the Targaryen escort. They balked, citing their orders to accompany him to Winterfell. Eddard reminded them that Moat Cailin was well within his territory, and that he would not bring a host of foreign soldiers through his heartland unannounced. Under protest, they yielded, sending a raven south to inform the crown. Eddard pressed on alone with his own retinue of Northmen. With each league traveled, he felt the land welcoming him back. Even the chill winds of autumn seemed like an embrace compared to the southern sun. When at last Winterfell's ancient walls came into view, Eddard felt a twisting in his chest. Here, his memories remained untarnished. Memories of a simpler time, of a future he once imagined, in which Robert Baratheon would be king or a close friend who would stand side by side with him for all their days. But that was gone now. The north glimmered in the crisp air, the pines standing tall around the fortress. Smoke curled from the chimneys. The gates swung open, and Eddard rode through, greeted by the startled expressions of guards who had not known what to expect. They bowed as he passed, relief evident on their faces. The war was over, and their lord had returned, alive if not unbroken. Inside the courtyard, stewards hurried to take the horses, and Eddard dismounted stiffly. As he surveyed the familiar stone keep, he saw the ghosts of the past. He remembered his father's stern counsel. He remembered Brandon's laughter. He remembered how Robert had once visited and marveled at the northern halls. All those echoes seemed to swirl around him. He climbed the steps to the great hall, where his castellan stood waiting with an uncertain smile. Readings were made, formalities exchanged. Everywhere he looked, Eddard saw cautious hope in the eyes of his people. They expected him to explain what had happened, to guide them through the storm of change. So that very evening, he assembled the household and the local lords. Torches flickered against the gray stone walls. The smell of roasted meat and bread drifted, but no one feasted. Instead, Eddard told them the grim tale: Robert's death at the Trident, the surrender, the forced kneeling before the Iron Throne, and the uneasy truce with the Targaryens. Men shook their heads in sorrow at the loss of Robert, whom they had admired as a fierce warrior. Others shared worried glances when they heard mention of King Aerys, the Mad King, and Prince Rhaegar's victory. Some asked about Lyanna, but Eddard had few answers. He only assured them that she lived, though he left out the details of her secret marriage, uncertain how to voice such a revelation without stoking further unrest. Late into the night, Eddard sat alone by the hearth in his solar. A single candle burned on a table, illuminating the scrolls he had to review. Letters demanding taxes, records of men who had perished, pleas for help from villagers whose breadwinners had been lost in the war. His head ached with the burdens that had fallen upon him. He had always known leadership was a heavy duty, but never had it felt so suffocating. A knock at the door broke his solitude. Maester Luwin entered, carrying a freshly written parchment. "My lord," he said, setting it gently on the table, "a raven has arrived from King's Landing. Prince Rhaegar has penned a letter to you directly." Eddard stared at the parchment for a moment. Carefully, he broke the seal and read. The prince's words were formal, but there was a sincerity beneath them. Rhaegar spoke of rebuilding the realm, mending relations, ensuring a stable future. He wrote that soon he would journey to Dorne to visit Lyanna, and that if Eddard wished to send word to his sister, he would carry it. The letter ended with an offer of peace, and a hope that in time, old wounds might heal. Eddard set the parchment aside, running a hand through his hair. He imagined Lyanna in Dorne, the hot southern sun on her face, the tall towers of the Martell's stronghold rising against a bright sky. Could she be content? Or even happy? With the Targaryen prince? Could she truly love the man who had ended Robert's life? The notion felt impossible to reconcile. Yet Eddard had glimpsed a flicker of sorrow in Rhaegar's gaze, a complexity that defied a simple labeling of villain or hero. He exhaled, pushing away the letter. Old wounds might heal, he murmured to himself, but scars remain. The candle guttered, sending shadows dancing along the walls. Outside, the wind howled, heralding the coming of a northern autumn. Eddard wondered if the entire realm would soon feel that chill, the uncertain future creeping upon them like a long winter. For now, the war was over. The rebels had lost. Targaryens held the throne. Ned Stark had bent the knee, and somewhere far away, Lyanna Stark might be dreaming of a different life than the one she had now. Perhaps she dreamed of home, or perhaps she dreamed of dragons. Sleep tugged at Eddard, but he fought it a while longer. He stared into the dwindling flames in the hearth. Faces swirled there. Robert's laughter, his father's grave visage, Brandon's grin, Lyanna dancing among the winter roses. Then Robert's face changed, contorted in pain as Rhaegar's blade struck. Eddard rubbed his eyes, trying to banish the memory, but it would not go easily. When he finally rose and made his way to his bedchamber, he paused at the window, looking out over Winterfell's ramparts. The courtyard was quiet, the silhouettes of guards moving like wraiths. Beyond the walls, the north stretched for hundreds of leagues, silent, ancient, waiting. Eddard felt that he had returned a different man, shaped by betrayal and sorrow. But he was still Lord of Winterfell, still Ned Stark, and the north would ever be his home. He would protect it, come what may, even if that meant living under the shadow of a dragon's wings. He closed the shutters against the chill wind and lay down. Tonight, for the first time since Robert's death, he found a measure of rest in Winterfell's familiar embrace. Tomorrow, the next day, and all the days after would bring fresh challenges. The Targaryens remained on the throne. The Mad King's madness was unchecked. Rhaegar's uncertain compassion might hold the realm together or might falter under his father's whims. Eddard resolved that he would meet every challenge with the quiet strength of the North, for the sake of his people and his memory of those who had died believing in something better. He whispered a final prayer to the old gods, asking them to watch over Lyanna, wherever she was, and keep her safe from the darkness he could sense circling the realm. The wind rattled the shutters once more, and then silence took hold. Stillness. For now. Though in the silent spaces, Eddard could almost hear the beating of dragon wings. The thrumming pulse of a realm shifting beneath the burden of new rule and old grudges. The night stretched on, and the embers in the hearth faded into a faint glow, like distant stars in a moonless sky. Yalki. Monoray. Andare. Pandai. Eddard Stark woke early the next morning, well before the faint light of dawn touched the towers of Winterfell. He had grown used to restless sleep, though in the familiar hush of the northern night, he found himself drifting in and out of uneasy dreams. They were shadows of the war he had just endured, and of the bitter surrender he had made. Sitting up in the darkness of his bedchamber, he pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes, trying to banish the memory of Robert's final, strangled breath at the trident. Each time he recalled it, a knot tightened in his chest. Outside, a crow gave a harsh caw, its voice echoing across the courtyard. Eddard rose, dressed quickly in a simple tunic and breeches, and stepped into the corridor. The torch sconces along the walls were dim, but he could still make out the familiar stones underfoot, worn smooth by centuries of Starks walking these halls. He thought of his father and brother, both gone to ash for daring to stand against the Mad King. Now that same king sat still upon the Iron Throne, and Eddard had bent his knee to him. The shame of it sank claws into his heart, though he told himself again that he had done what he must. For the sake of the North, for his people, and for Lyanna. If any chance remained of bringing her safely home one day. He made his way outside, breathing in the crisp northern air. The sky was a tapestry of stars still visible in the blackness above. Along the battlements, the guards on duty nodded respectfully at him. But they did not speak. He appreciated their silence. He looked over the expanse of Winterfell below him. The courtyard with its training yard, the scattered outbuildings, the stables, the looming first keep, and beyond all that, the faint silhouettes of the godswood trees. Dawn was coming, and soon the hustle of the castle's day would begin. Kitchens bustling, stewards scurrying with requests from the local lords, blacksmiths hammering at steel. Winterfell was alive again, and for a moment, Eddard allowed himself to feel a flicker of gratitude. At least in the north, his people could find some kind of peace in the aftermath of defeat. When the first pale glow touched the horizon, he descended into the courtyard. The stable hands were already awake, grooming horses for the day's tasks. One gave him a polite bow as he passed. Another carried hay bales over his shoulder. A few old hounds wandered lazily among them, sniffing for scraps. Winterfell was no longer the martial camp it had been in the months leading to open war. Now, it bore the marks of that conflict in smaller ways. Fewer men walking about in armor, more patched cloaks, the lingering emptiness left by those lost to battles far from home. Eddard recalled how so many eager young men had marched south at his side, proud to follow Lord Stark, believing their cause righteous and unstoppable. "Lord Stark," came a voice behind him. He turned to find Maester Luwin, mild-eyed and calm in the chill air, rubbing his hands together for warmth. "Shall I have breakfast sent to your solar? Or perhaps you would prefer to break your fast in the Great Hall?" Eddard was not hungry, but he knew he must keep his strength. "In my solar," he said, his voice low. "And please, send for the Castellan. There are matters we must see to." Maester Luwin inclined his head. "Right away, my lord." Eddard crossed the yard toward a side door that led into a small corridor connecting to his tower. As he walked, he glanced up at the walls again, noticing a pair of Targaryen guards posted near the gate. The sight still rattled him. Even if he had dismissed most of the Targaryen escort at Moat Cailin, a small contingent had marched on, carrying official orders from King's Landing that a royal garrison must maintain watch within Winterfell's vicinity. They were led by a stiff-necked knight named Sir Garini, a man prone to narrow-eyed suspicion of all Northmen. Eddard's own guards gave them a wide berth, exchanging few words. Their presence was an uneasy compromise, a symbol of the realm's unity on paper, yet a reminder of Eddard's humiliation in practice. He inhaled sharply and forced himself to move on. For the sake of peace, he would endure them. In his solar, the hearth fire had been lit some time earlier, driving away the night's chill. Eddard settled at the long wooden table, where maps and scrolls lay in organized piles. A single window let in the muted dawn light, illuminating the dust motes that floated in the air. He felt that he should organize his thoughts. If the Targaryen presence was to remain, then he had to integrate them somehow, or at least keep them from antagonizing his own men. He opened a leather-bound ledger, scanning the supplies on hand, the number of able-bodied men left in Winterfell, the cost of supporting this unwelcome garrison, and the demands from smaller lords and bannermen across the north. War was not simply a matter of swords. It left the land in disarray, and Eddard had to pick up the pieces. A soft knock at the door announced the arrival of the Castellan, Baratheon, a middle-aged man with a thinning hairline and steady eyes. A pair of servants followed, one carrying a steaming pot of porridge, the other setting out bread, cheese, and a pitcher of watered ale. They placed the food quickly and left, closing the door behind them. Eddard gestured for Baratheon to sit. "My lord," said the Castellan, folding his hands in his lap. "We are nearly out of coin from the funds we reserved for the war effort. Rebuilding the outlying farms and roads that were neglected during the campaign will cost more than I first calculated. We could tax the small folk further, but they have only just begun to recover. It would breed ill will." Eddard nodded grimly. "We will not press the people harder. They've suffered enough. Find other means. And what of the Targaryen soldiers? Have there been any incidents? None so far, Baratheon said, but there is tension. The Northmen who survived the war have little love for dragon banners strolling freely in Winterfell. And the Targaryens, by their bearing, seem to consider us barely more than unwashed rebels. A few of the guards on both sides spat insults last night by the stables. Nothing came of it, but if it continues I cannot promise fists won't fly. Der mess. Eddard massaged his temple, a faint ache starting there. Speak to Roderick. Tell him to keep a tight rein on our men. Any man who starts a fight or escalates one will answer to me. We cannot afford to provoke a new conflict. Baratheon inclined his head. As you say, my lord. Another matter. I have had word from Lord Bolton. He sends his regards on your safe return, but invites you to the Dreadfort to discuss the new political realities. He writes that he would appreciate your counsel on how best to address House Targaryen's demands. Eddard's brow tensed. Roose Bolton was not a man he fully trusted. Like all Boltons, he bore that unsettling air of calm menace. They had marched under the Stark banner during the war. But Eddard knew if the realm faltered, House Bolton would weigh its own advantage. Send a polite reply, he said, but I won't be journeying to the Dreadfort anytime soon. If he wishes to discuss matters, he can come here. And the other houses. Lord Manderley has already requested a formal meeting to see you face to face, to reaffirm his loyalty. He may want to discuss trade concerns as well. Of course he does, Eddard said quietly. Send word that I will host him in 2 weeks' time. Make sure the guest quarters are ready. Then he sighed. Summon me if any other urgent correspondence arrives. Thank you, Baratheon. Baratheon rose, bowed, and left. Eddard stared at the untouched porridge, stirring it absently with a spoon. His thoughts returned again to the memory of that day by the Trident, as they always did, unbidden. He imagined Robert's body sinking in the red-stained water. He thought of Prince Rhaegar's face, solemn and bloody, and he recalled kneeling in the mud, hearing that dreaded command to lay down arms for the Targaryens. His father, if alive, would have roared in outrage at the notion. Yet Eddard could do nothing else. He ate a few spoonfuls, tasting nothing but the bitterness that dwelled in his heart. When the meal was done, he pushed the bowl aside and rubbed his tired eyes. The day had only just begun, and there were hours of tasks ahead. By midday, the courtyard was bustling with men and women carrying crates, barrels, and bales of hay. A couple of the Targaryen guards stood by, watchful. Eddard could not shake the sense that eyes followed him wherever he went. He strode toward the training yard, where a handful of younger squires drilled with wooden swords under the guidance of Jory Castle, a loyal retainer. The ring of wood on wood provided a strangely comforting rhythm, a reminder of the normalcy Winterfell could still foster. Jory looked up and offered a respectful bow of his head. My lord, it's good to see you here. His tone carried unspoken sympathy. Jory had been with Eddard in the war, had seen Robert's demise with his own eyes, though from a distance. Eddard returned the nod. I'm glad to see these lads training. The realm might be at peace for now, but no man can know what storms tomorrow brings. He watched as one squire, an Umber's boy, tall for his age, swung his practiced blade with surprising speed, forcing his opponent on the defensive. Are they learning discipline, as well as technique? Jory gave him a small smile. We're trying. They've got youthful vigor, but not the sense the gods gave a goose sometimes. He raised his voice. Halt, both of you. Keep your guard high. Then he lowered his tone. My lord, may I speak freely? Always, Jory. There's talk among the men. Whispers that the Targaryens won't stop at occupying Winterfell's gates, that they might come for the lords, or impose heavier taxes, or that Prince Rhaegar plans to send for your sister, and that he's only stalling until the time is right to make the North bend further. Some are worried, others, they're angry. Then to see. Eddard let out a steady breath. They have cause for concern, but we cannot raise arms again. Not now. If we did, The bloodshed would drown us all. Rhaegar claims to want peace, and for the moment, we must trust in that. The Mad King is the greater threat, but as long as Rhaegar holds the realm in check, I'd rather not see more Northmen die. Jory nodded in agreement. Aye, my lord. I'll keep my ear to the ground. If the men get too restless, I'll warn you before matters escalate. Now. Eddard thanked him and left the squires to their training, heading toward the Godswood. The day's sky was a pale, cloudless blue, the sun's rays cool against his skin. Entering the Godswood, he felt a hush descend, a stillness that cut him off from the everyday clamor beyond. The mossy ground muffled his footsteps. He breathed in the scent of pine and moist earth, letting it steady his thoughts. Ahead, the heart tree rose tall, its ancient face carved into the white bark. Red leaves rustled in a faint breeze, and the small pool beneath it reflected the canopy overhead. He approached the heart tree and knelt, resting a hand on the gnarled roots. The face carved into the trunk had watched over House Stark for thousands of years, its expression solemn, sad, and knowing. Here, Eddard sought comfort and the guidance of the old gods. His voice was barely a whisper. Give me the strength to protect my people, to honor my vows, even if they taste of bile, and watch over my sister, wherever she is. Memterdine. As always, the old gods gave no answer in words, only the rustling leaves, the stir of water. But Eddard felt a faint sense of calm welling inside him. It was all he could ask for. He bowed his head, staying that way for several heartbeats, letting the quiet saturate his thoughts. If the realm was to heal, it would require men who could temper their anger and set aside their pride. That task seemed as monumental as toppling mountains, but he had little choice. When he finally rose, the sun had moved further across the sky, and he knew that the next round of duties waited. Reluctantly, he left the solace of the Godswood. He returned to the keep and made his way up the spiral steps to his solar once more. Passing through the corridors, he noted the occasional Targaryen soldier, always with that black and red sigil of the dragon on their breast, always wearing an air of wariness. He saw how the servants kept their eyes lowered when they passed those men, how a hush fell in their presence. In time, perhaps this tension would lessen, or perhaps not. In the solar, Maester Luwin was waiting with a rolled parchment in hand, the seal unbroken. My lord, he said, a raven arrived, bearing the seal of House Tully. Eddard's chest tightened a fraction. House Tully? Luwin nodded. Yes, my lord. Shall I read it to you? Eddard took the parchment gently. House Tully of Riverrun had been an ally. Catelyn Tully was to have wed Brandon Stark, his elder brother, before King Aerys had Brandon executed. After that tragedy, there had been talk that Eddard himself might wed Catelyn, to secure the alliance, though war and chaos had interrupted all such plans. I'll read it, he murmured. He broke the seal and unrolled the letter. The script was formal, but the words carried an undercurrent of warmth. Lord Hoster Tully wrote that he wished to see the bond between House Tully and House Stark remain firm, despite the outcome of the rebellion. The letter went on to say that his daughter, Catelyn, was still of a mind to fulfill the arrangement that had once been made. Lord Hoster delicately suggested that if Eddard was willing, the wedding might occur soon, cementing an alliance that could offer both houses stability in these uncertain times. Eddard exhaled slowly. Lord Tully is persistent, he said. He sees the advantage in uniting our houses, now that the war is over. Luwin hesitated. My lord, we still have Targaryen soldiers quartered in Winterfell. A wedding might be a bright moment, but also a complication. And there's the question of bride's own feelings. The arrangement was made for Brandon first, and now that he's gone, well, such matches often follow the family line. But the lady might have reservations. Nantarite. Eddard set the parchment down. His thoughts drifted to the memory of Brandon's brash laugh, to how sure-footed his brother had been in all things, how quickly he'd fallen to the Mad King's cruelty. We can't know Lady Catelyn's feelings unless she speaks them herself, he said. But if Lord Hoster suggests it, perhaps she does not object, and the alliance would strengthen the North. Still, It is no small matter to bind ourselves in marriage at a time like this. Lewin nodded. No small matter indeed, my lord. Eddard let silence linger. The notion of marrying Catelyn Tully to uphold a betrothal once meant for Brandon felt strange, like a garment that belonged to another. Yet he also recalled the urgent need to keep the North protected from any royal wrath. Allies to the south might be the difference between life and death for thousands. It was the way of houses, he reminded himself, to bind themselves for mutual benefit. That was the reality of the times. Maester, draft a reply, he said at last. Tell Lord Tully that I appreciate his kind words, and that I will consider his proposal, that we should meet and discuss the matter, in person or through envoys. Lewin bowed. Yes, my lord. When the maester left, Eddard paced the room, thinking. He still wrestled with the ghosts of war, the looming question of Lyanna, and the uneasy presence of Targaryen forces. Another question now arose. If he married, would that hamper any rescue of Lyanna should she cry out for help one day? Would it complicate alliances if the Tullys found out she was supposedly wed to Rhaegar Targaryen? The realm overflowed with delicate secrets. Lyanna's abduction, if indeed it was an abduction, though Rhaegar claimed otherwise, had been the spark that ignited the entire conflict. Could Eddard truly sit by and let her remain in the south? Night fell over Winterfell without a clear answer. Torches lit the halls, and Eddard found himself in the great hall with his bannermen and guests. The meal was not lavish. Stew, bread, salted pork, and ale. Whispers passed between men about the Targaryen soldiers. Eddard noticed that none of the Targaryen knights dined in the great hall tonight. They took their meals in the smaller hall assigned to them. Perhaps it was for the best. Alcohol and resentment were a poor combination. He sat at the head table, absent-mindedly tearing bread. The flicker of candles and the drone of 100 voices filled the space, but he felt removed from it, a distant observer in his own home. Jon Umber, the boy who had been training earlier, stood near his father, Great Jon Umber, who was regaling some men with a tale of wrestling a wildling raider in the snows beyond the wall. A few seats away, Lady Barbary Risewell conversed softly with her kin, shooting curious glances toward Eddard, perhaps wondering what he intended to do next. As the evening wore on, Eddard excused himself. The press of people felt suffocating, and the thoughts swirling in his mind offered little respite. Instead, he walked the corridors, passing fewer and fewer torches until he reached the darker recesses of Winterfell. It was there he found the old library, silent and abandoned at this hour. The thick smell of parchment, ink, and dust greeted him when he stepped inside. He picked a corridor of shelves at random, letting the faint light from the corridor sconces guide him. Rows of weathered tomes and scrolls stretched around him. Records of births and deaths, treatises on the history of the North, genealogies of the ancient houses, and more. Some volumes might never have been opened in his lifetime. He let his hand brush the spines, thinking of the knowledge stored here, dormant until called upon. There were histories of the Targaryen kings, no doubt. Perhaps if he looked, he would find older accounts of rebellions, alliances, and betrayals. The realm had been shaped by so many storms. Now it endured another aftermath. A whisper of movement sounded behind him. He turned to see a torch's glow bobbing in the gloom. A young man stepped into view, wearing a neatly belted robe. Maester Lewin again, it seemed, or so Eddard thought at first. But then he realized it was one of the younger stewards, a lad named Aethan, who carried a torch and a small stack of books bound in leather. "My lord." The lad startled, nearly dropping the books. "I didn't know you were here." Eddard gave a faint, reassuring nod. "I needed some quiet. What brings you to the library at this hour?" Aethan swallowed. "The Targaryen knights, my lord. They asked for certain records of the North, as if to study them. I was fetching the volumes on Winterfell's lineage, the inventory from previous reigns, and some maps." "No." Eddard frowned, confusion and a flicker of suspicion stirring. "Why do they want such records?" "I'm not certain, my lord. Sir Garin mentioned that they wanted to understand the resources of the North more thoroughly. He didn't say for what purpose. Eddard's hand tightened at his side. The Targaryen presence was more than just a symbolic guard. They were prying, perhaps gauging how to control or manipulate. Or maybe it was simply Rhaegar's attempt at better governance. Still, the notion unsettled him. "Very well," Eddard said. "Finish your errand, but watch carefully. If there's anything unusual they ask for or any mention of new decrees or taxes, inform Maester Luwin or me immediately." Aethan nodded. "Yes, my lord." When the lad left, Eddard stood among the shelves a while longer. The torchlight faded, leaving him in a dim hush. He found himself reading the titles of old manuscripts as if searching for an answer among them. Titles on the Age of Heroes, the Long Night, the Rise of the Dragons. He exhaled a breath that stirred the dust motes. The Targaryens' victory had cast a shadow across the Seven Kingdoms, and that shadow reached even to this quiet library in Winterfell. At length, he returned to his solar. Sleep would not come easily, but he would at least attempt to rest. He opened the door to find it in darkness. Only the banked embers in the hearth gave any light. He sank into a chair, staring into those embers, letting the warmth brush his face. He thought again of Robert, of that fierce grin and unstoppable laugh. Robert had always boasted that he would kill Rhaegar, that he would smash the dragons, and stand triumphant. Instead, he lay in an unmarked grave by the Trident, a cautionary tale for men who believed anger alone was enough to conquer the world. It felt as if an hour passed before he heard a soft knock. He rose, moving to the door, his joints stiff. He opened it to find a guard named Darren, a stalwart fellow who had served his father. "My lord," Darren said, his voice tight with apology for disturbing Eddard at so late an hour. "Sir Garin requests an audience with you in the morning. He says it's urgent but not an emergency. I told him you would receive him at your convenience." Eddard sighed. "The Targaryen knight. Very well. Inform him I'll see him in the great hall after first light." Darren inclined his head. "As you will, my lord." When the man was gone, Eddard shut the door and let out a long breath. Whatever Sir Garin wanted would likely not be pleasant. Perhaps the Targaryens had new demands or fresh instructions from King's Landing. Or it might be that Rhaegar's father, the Mad King, had decided to twist the knife in some new way. Eddard rubbed his temples again. Though the day had been long, the night offered no relief. He suspected it would be so for a very long time to come. Eventually he pulled off his boots and lay on the bed. Though sleep was a distant hope. The wind outside rattled the shutters, and he listened to it carry across Winterfell's towers. He tried to picture the old days when the castle halls had been filled with his father's stern presence, with Brandon's boisterous laughter, with Robert visiting and making ribald jokes. The future bright. That was lost now. His last waking thought was of Lyanna. He wondered if she too lay awake in some far-off tower, dreaming of home, cursing the fate that had bound her to the man who slew Robert, or if she saw Rhaegar differently now. The question tugged at him like a persistent tide, but there was no answering it. At length, he slipped into a broken sleep, haunted by half-formed dreams of rubies scattering across the waters of the Trident, of a dragon's shadow stretching wide over the snows of the north. Morning came in the form of dull light seeping through the shutters. Eddard rose, washed his face in a basin of cold water, and donned a warm doublet embroidered with the stark direwolf. When he stepped into the hall, he found it already stirring. Servants hustled past, carrying trays of bread and pitchers of milk. Voices echoed from the courtyard, where the Targaryen guards had presumably begun their own routine. Eddard took a moment to center himself. The day promised challenges. He marched to the great hall, where a few local lords who had stayed the night were already breaking their fast. The big stone fireplace roared, lending warmth and a play of shadows on the rough walls. Eddard settled at the high seat and gestured for a servant to bring a light meal of oatcakes and boiled eggs. He had little appetite, but he needed something to steady him. The men at the tables offered respectful nods, though they murmured among themselves. Eddard was used to it. The North watched him closely, hoping for strength, dreading an uncertain future. Eventually, the doors opened to admit Sir Garin. He was of middle years, with a thin mustache and close-cropped hair that showed a trace of gray at the temples. His black and silver armor bore the three-headed dragon across the breastplate. He moved with an air of rigid confidence, a man who expected to be obeyed. 2 Targaryen men-at-arms followed at his back, but Eddard gestured for them to remain near the entrance while Garand came forward alone. Eddard inclined his head in polite greeting. "Sir Garand, I trust you've rested well." "As well as can be expected," the knight replied with a small stiff bow. "Winterfell has its comforts, though it is colder than I'm accustomed to." "Winter is harsher yet in other months," Eddard said. "You may find this quite temperate." Sir Garand forced a thin smile. "I did not come to discuss the weather, Lord Stark. I have received a raven from King's Landing. Prince Rhaegar instructed me to inform you of certain measures. The crown is set on ensuring that no further sedition stirs in the realm, especially in areas once loyal to the so-called rebellion." Eddard's gaze hardened slightly. He waved a servant away, indicating that breakfast was over. The great hall grew quieter as men took notice of the conversation. "Go on," he said. Sir Garand produced a scroll from a leather pouch. "His Grace, King Aerys, and Prince Rhaegar have decreed that a thorough audit of levies and supplies be conducted throughout the realm. In each region, enumerators appointed by the crown will document the available fighting men, storehouses, and finances. We will send such enumerators here within a fortnight, perhaps 2. Their job is to ensure no lord is secretly gathering arms and grain to renew hostilities." "The man?" Eddard felt a surge of anger at the implied mistrust, but he kept his voice calm. "I have no intention of renewing war. The North has bled enough. If Rhaegar wants an audit, we will cooperate within reason. But we are not southern realms. Travel here is difficult, the land vast, and winter always near. I hope the enumerators come prepared." Sir Garand inclined his head. "I will inform the crown of your position. For now, we remain at Winterfell. This measure will extend to other northern houses as well, particularly those who supported the rebellion." He paused, his eyes moving over the men seated at the tables, as if gauging their reactions. "We ask that you reassure your bannermen. Resisting or obstructing crown enumerators will not end well for anyone." Eddard's jaw tightened. "They will have no trouble from me." He forced a curt smile. "If the enumerators are fair and do not harass my people, they will be met with courtesy." "Is that all?" "Then..." Sir Garand's lips twitched, and he almost looked disappointed that Eddard had not reacted with visible rage. "That is all for now, my lord. I shall take my leave." He offered a short bow, turned on his heel, and marched out. His men followed with the clank of armor. The hush in the great hall remained. Eddard could feel the unspoken questions. At length, men resumed their meals, speaking in low tones. Eddard stared at the closed doors, mind churning. Enumerators from the crown prying into the North's resources. It was an insult, but also a sign that the Targaryens feared rebellion still smoldered. He rose from the table. A few local lords made to speak with him, but he excused himself, wanting a moment of clarity. Outside, the day had warmed enough to melt the thin layer of frost on the ground. Water dripped from the eaves in a steady trickle. He walked toward the old stables, where the smell of hay and horse sweat enveloped him. Inside, stable boys bustled about, and the horses stamped their hooves. Eddard spotted a familiar dark mare that had carried him to the Trident and back. He gently stroked her flank, remembering the thunder of the battlefield, the fear and adrenaline surging in his veins as the armies clashed. Footsteps behind him. He turned to see Sir Roderick Castle, his master-at-arms, a stalwart man with a graying beard. Roderick bowed. "My lord, word spreads fast. Men are speaking of enumerators, taxes, and new scrutiny from King's Landing. The stable boys are worried they'll be conscripted next." Eddard grimaced. "Unlikely. But fear breeds rumor. We can't let panic grip the castle. The Targaryens want to tighten their hold. We will comply where we must and push back where we can." "Bane?" Roderick nodded. "I understand, my lord. The North is proud, and many resent the idea of crown men poking their noses into our affairs. We might do well to keep a close watch on any enumerators. Not to threaten them, but to ensure no one in the North tries to do something rash." "Agreed," Eddard said. "Assign trusted men. They should be polite, but vigilant. I want no cause for the Targaryens to punish us. At the same time, if the crown's men overstep their bounds, we will record every detail. De was thou. Roderick bowed again and left Eddard in the stable. After a while, Eddard moved on, walking a circuit of Winterfell. Men doffed their caps or bowed their heads as he passed, but he caught the tension in their eyes. The presence of Targaryens, the looming audits, they were unwelcome guests. Eddard tried to project calm. Inside he was anything but. Later that afternoon, a messenger arrived from the Barrows in the southern part of the north, near the Barrowlands. Lord Dustin wrote to say that rumors flew of new taxes for those who had once marched with the rebels. Dustin's letter was full of righteous anger, demanding that Eddard speak for the north and refuse any extra burdens. Eddard read it carefully, then sighed. He found himself drafting a measured response, neither promising defiance nor ceding the right to question the crown's demands. He wrote that he would do all in his power to keep the north from undue hardship, but that wise men must tread carefully to avoid more bloodshed. As the sun dipped westward, Eddard felt drained by the unrelenting parade of tasks. He finally sought out a moment's quiet at the walls, standing beside a guard who kept watch over the plains beyond Winterfell. The guard touched 2 fingers to his brow in salute, then returned to his vigil. Eddard looked out at the wide expanse of brownish-green fields and distant forests. If he peered hard enough, he thought he could see faint lines of the King's Road to the south. Once, it had carried him to war, bold and furious. Now it carried him home in reluctant submission. A raven soared overhead, cutting across the pink and orange streaks of the evening sky. Eddard wondered if it bore more letters of demands and orders from King's Landing, or perhaps from the Vale, where Jon Arryn was grappling with his own burdens. He hoped Jon fared well. They had both knelt. They both had to protect their people under the suspicious gaze of the Targaryens. At dusk, Eddard returned to his solar and found a new missive waiting. This one sealed with a golden dragon, the personal sigil of Prince Rhaegar. Slowly, he broke the seal and unfolded the parchment. The prince's handwriting was neat and deliberate. Eddard read the words by the light of a single candle. Lord Stark, I understand your burden. I wish I could say the demands from King's Landing were otherwise, but my father's will is not something I can completely overturn at present. The enumerators are meant to ensure no hostilities rise again. I give you my word that I will keep them from imposing undue penalties, so long as you maintain peace. Our realm has spilled too much blood. On another note, I go soon to Dorne to visit my lady wife Lyanna. She is well, though restless in her seclusion. Perhaps if matters remain stable, she may travel north under guard. It is not yet certain. I only ask that you do not attempt any interference that might endanger her or incite my father's wrath. I ask this not as a threat, but as an appeal to reason. Your sister's safety is dear to me. For the good of the realm, let us each do our part. I harbor no joy in overshadowing the north, but we must preserve peace. Rhaegar Targaryen. Eddard stared at the words about Lyanna. Alive and in Dorne, restless. He could almost hear her voice, complaining of the heat, yearning for the pine forests of the north. He felt anger coil in him anew. Rhaegar had claimed her, and now, even though the war ended, Lyanna was still separated from her family. But there was nothing he could do. His hand tightened on the parchment. If only he could ride south and see for himself that she was safe. But to do so would be seen as provocation. He had no illusions about how quickly the Targaryens would respond if they perceived a threat to their precious heir and his bride. Slowly, he refolded the letter. His thoughts churned in circles. He saw that Rhaegar was offering a courtesy. If any of this was sincere, it meant the prince was trying to keep the realm stable, even as the Mad King's demands rained down. And Rhaegar's mention of a possible visit from Lyanna cut Eddard to the quick. Could she truly come north, even under guard? Would she be free, or would it be another form of captivity in the presence of Targaryen watchers? He set the parchment aside, stirring the candle flame as he did. A part of him knew that if the realm was to endure without spiraling into further slaughter, men like him had to yield. But the cost weighed heavily. If Rhaegar intended to protect Lyanna, if he truly cared for her, Then Eddard might one day salvage something from the ashes. Perhaps he could speak with her face to face, learn how she felt about this strange union. He pictured her laughter, the way she'd once teased him, the warmth in her eyes. He prayed she had not lost that spark beneath the weight of a forced marriage, if it was forced at all. He heard a distant shout in the courtyard, and realized the night was wearing on. The time for reflection was ending. The time to step once more into duty was at hand. There would be no easy answers. Rhaegar's letter implied that the Targaryens would remain vigilant, that any hint of rebellion in the north would trigger swift response. Eddard knew his people. They would not bow easily, not to the dragon, not after what had happened. Yet he had to hold them in check, or watch them die in fruitless defiance. Duty. Honor. Survival. They bound him like iron shackles. Rising from his chair, Eddard put out the candle and headed into the corridor, where lamplight glowed faintly. Steps led downward toward the hall, where men would still talk and fret over the future. Let them see him, their lord, walking among them, calm, sure. Even if he felt far from calm and far from sure, they needed the image of it. That was part of the weight a Stark had to bear. In the flickering glow, he descended, each footstep echoing. Outside, the wind picked up, howling over Winterfell's walls. The north reminded him it was still there, ancient and unbowed. The Targaryens could watch, measure, and audit. But the land itself would not bend. Winter would come in time, harsh and unyielding. Perhaps it would test them all more than any war could. He steeled himself for the morrow, for all the letters, demands, and negotiations that might lie ahead, for the possibility of forging alliances that once felt unthinkable. One step at a time, that was all he could manage. For now, he told himself, the dead could rest, and he would do what was necessary to guard the living. The memory of Robert Baratheon, that towering friend who once brought laughter and confidence into Eddard's life, would remain a private ache. As for Lyanna, he would pray for the day he could see her again, however guarded or fleeting that meeting might be. Yes, 5 days ago, he had knelt in the mud before Prince Rhaegar, ceding the rebellion and surrendering the dream of a free realm unchained by Targaryen rule. Now he stood as the Lord of Winterfell, pledged to keep the peace beneath the dragon's shadow. The old gods bore silent witness to it all. The night sky stretched overhead, infinite and cold, as Eddard Stark pressed on into the flickering torchlight of his home, resolved to face another day in a realm forever changed by the blood spilled at the Trident. And though every step felt like walking through the echo of a lost war, he would not falter. Winterfell needed him, and the North would endure, if only he could guide it without letting the simmering resentments ignite anew. He took a deep breath, let it out slowly, and squared his shoulders. Tomorrow, he thought. Always tomorrow. Eddard Stark spent the next few days walking a precarious line between patience and dread. Every morning, he rose to oversee Winterfell's routine, to greet his bannermen and the minor lords who arrived at the castle gates with offers of service or demands for answers. Every afternoon, he found himself bombarded by fresh messages from outside the north, or by the constant vigilance of the Targaryen garrison, whose captain, Sir Garren, plainly believed he was among rebels just waiting for a spark. And every night, Eddard paced the corridors alone, recalling the haunting details of Robert's death and the ghostly image of Rhaegar Targaryen's sword coming away bloodied at the Trident. That single memory weighed upon him like an anchor he could never discard. He strove to project the calm authority that his people needed. In the Great Hall, he held short audiences, hearing local disputes, a farmer complaining that a neighboring landholder was diverting a stream, a blacksmith claiming his neighbor had stolen an iron horseshoe mold. Mundane problems, yet they were a welcome relief compared to the swirl of fear that pervaded the realm. Eddard tried to resolve each matter with the same fairness his father had once shown. It kept his mind anchored in the present, if only for a while. But always beyond these small disputes, the larger threat loomed. The enumerators from King's Landing, the audits, the Targaryen scrutiny. Whenever Eddard stepped into the yard, he could feel the tension. Stark men-at-arms often wore grim, stoic faces. Targaryen guards eyed them warily from across the courtyard. as though expecting treachery at any moment. It was a tinderbox waiting for a stray ember. And with each day that passed, Eddard found himself waiting for the enumerators to arrive, certain that their presence would stoke the old resentments and raw wounds among his people. Shortly after midday on a crisp morning, as the autumn chill brushed the castle walls, a scout rode in from the south. Mud spattered the flanks of his horse, and his face was flushed from a hard ride. Eddard had been in the training yard, watching Roderick Castle put a pair of new recruits through sword drills. At the sight of the scout galloping in, Eddard exchanged a look with Roderick. Both knew what it likely meant, and walked quickly to meet the man at the stables. "My lord," gasped the scout, sliding off his horse and bowing. "They're here. A party of 20, maybe more. Banners of the crown, and a few with Prince Rhaegar's personal device. Look to be less than half a day's ride away, headed for Winterfell." Eddard thanked the man, dismissing him to find food and rest. His gaze went to Sir Garin, who had emerged from a nearby archway. The Targaryen knight listened with lips pressed in a thin line, as if this was the moment he'd been expecting all along. The enumerators were near. Eddard imagined them as a group of scribes, lesser lords and soldiers, come to pry into every corner of the North's resources. A necessary evil, Rhaegar's letter had called it. Perhaps so. Yet Eddard wondered if the enumerators would limit themselves to documentation, or if they would be quick to punish any sign of defiance. He paused, near Sir Garin, a faint tension rippling between them. "Your enumerators approach." Garin inclined his head. "His Grace's enumerators, yes. They will do as commanded. My men and I will ensure their safety and cooperation." Eddard suppressed a flicker of annoyance at the knight's tone. "I expect no violence. Still, there is ill feeling. If the enumerators are wise, they'll move with care." Garin gave a curt nod. "They have been warned about the temper of the North. They will do their duty." With that, he turned away, evidently deciding there was nothing more to discuss. Eddard watched him go, frustration simmering. But he reminded himself that open confrontation served no one. He had to remain a level head here. Already a few of his men had gathered behind him, curious about the news. Among them stood Jory Castle, brow furrowed, and Baratheon the Castellan, worry etched in every line of his face. Eddard raised his voice just enough for them to hear. "Make ready the Great Hall for our visitors. Prepare accommodations where the enumerators can work, likely for some days. They will need tables, a place to keep their records, space for their horses and wagons." "De merci." Baratheon bowed. "Yes, my lord. I'll see it done." Jory spoke quietly, wary of Targaryen ears. "My lord, shall we have extra guards posted? I don't like the idea of men loyal to the crown prowling the castle without supervision." Eddard's mouth tightened. "We'll keep watch, but discreetly, Jory. We don't want to give them any reason to suspect us. We have enough problems." Jory nodded. Understood. They parted ways, each to their tasks. Eddard felt the knot in his stomach grow tighter with each passing minute. Before the sun dipped too low, the enumerator party arrived at Winterfell's gates. Eddard and several Stark men awaited them in the courtyard, joined by Sir Garin and a dozen Targaryen guards stationed at the walls. The men who came carried a banner that indeed bore the three-headed dragon, but the group at its head were no knights. They looked more like scribes and small courtiers wearing fine but modest cloaks. Soldiers surrounded them, swords at their hips, but the central figures carried scrolls, books, and ink-stained quills. A slender man wearing a sash of deep crimson dismounted with a practiced ease. He bowed to Eddard, if not deeply then at least politely. "My Lord Stark, I am Lord Giles Rosby, appointed Chief Enumerator by the Crown. With your leave, we shall begin our inspection of the North's resources and rosters." Eddard returned the bow with measured courtesy. "Welcome to Winterfell, Lord Giles. You'll have chambers prepared for you and your men. My Castellan can show you to them. If you wish, we can dine in the Great Hall once you've settled." "Nap." Rosby offered a careful smile. "Thank you, Lord Stark. That would be most agreeable. We have had a long journey, and tomorrow we'll begin our official tasks. Our scribes will need to gather your ledgers, your rosters of men-at-arms, your stockpiles of grain and other goods." Though the man's tone was polite, Eddard could hear the underlying implication. Cooperate, and this will go smoothly. Resist, and the crown's disfavor will follow. Eddard nodded once. Then tomorrow, at first light, I will have my steward make those records available. The North has little to hide, only the truth of its hardships. Rosby inclined his head. We are not here to punish anyone who is honest with the crown, he said smoothly. Only to ensure that peace remains. Sir Garin stepped forward to greet the enumerators, greeting each soldier with a certain formality that made Eddard feel like a visitor in his own castle. The enumerators' escort were a mix of sworn swords from King's Landing, and a few sellswords bearing Targaryen surcoats. Eddard recognized none of them. Soon, servants were summoned. Trunks of parchment were unloaded from wagons, and the courtyard turned into a flurry of motion. Men barked orders. Horses snorted and shook sweat from their coats. Guards from both sides eyed one another with suspicion. Eddard led Lord Giles into the keep, guiding him through corridors lit by torches. Targaryen soldiers followed close behind, as though waiting for any sign of betrayal. More than once, Eddard felt an urge to remind them that this was Winterfell, not the Red Keep. But he held his tongue. On the way, they passed by a few local lords who had come to discuss trade matters with Eddard. These men glared openly at the enumerators, and Eddard offered them a subtle warning glance to keep silent. He could practically feel the waves of resentment building around him like a tide. Once Lord Giles and his scribes were ushered into the dedicated rooms, Eddard made sure servants helped them settle. Then he withdrew, leaving them to their unpacking. He retreated to his solar, where he found Maester Luwin waiting with fresh letters to read, one from White Harbor, another from the Dreadfort. The fortress-like sense of safety he usually felt in his own domain was marred by the knowledge that Targaryen eyes now roved every corridor, that soon they'd be rifling through Winterfell's records, counting men as if they were sheep. He smoothed a hand over his brow. Maester, he said softly, I trust you'll help them find what they need. It must be done carefully, or they'll twist any small discrepancy into an accusation. Luwin nodded, though he looked uneasy. Yes, my lord. We'll be thorough, but the enumerators will want to see not just the numbers. Likely they'll also want to question men about how many swords can be called upon in time of war. Better YD. Eddard grimaced. I know. It's humiliating, but let it pass. If we give them no reason to doubt us, perhaps they'll depart sooner. Luwin regarded him kindly. And what if they pry into your plans regarding marriage alliances or any other arrangement they suspect might turn into a renewed alliance against the crown? Eddard sighed. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it. For now, I'm just Lord Stark, cooperating with the king's enumerators. That is what I must do. Me. They spent the remainder of the afternoon reviewing the letters from White Harbor and the Dreadfort. Lord Manderley expressed a desire to welcome Eddard to his city again, though he also hinted at frustration over rumored taxes. Roose Bolton spoke in calm but pointed sentences, curious about how thoroughly these enumerators intended to root out possible rebellious sentiments. Bolton's letter seemed almost too polite, and Eddard felt a chill. The Boltons, with their flayed man's sigil, had once warred against the Starks. Their loyalty was not guaranteed in the face of shifting power. By the time the sky darkened, Eddard was weary from the weight of responsibility. He made his way to the Great Hall, where a modest feast was laid out, a courtesy for the newly arrived enumerators. Wooden tables stretched beneath the dim torchlight, bearing loaves of bread, roasted game, and flagons of ale. The enumerators trickled in, their eyes flicking about, taking in Winterfell's architecture, the high stone walls, the old tapestries. Eddard sat at the high seat, flanked by Roderick Castle and Barthogen on one side, and with Lord Giles Rosby and another scribe named Royan to his left. The hall filled with subdued conversation. A few of the North's lesser lords were present, each wearing an expression that ranged from polite neutrality to barely veiled resentment. Bowls of stew were passed around. The enumerators insisted on tasting each dish with caution, as though half expecting poison. Eddard could not blame them entirely. Paranoia was rife in these times. Still, it made the meal a stiff, awkward affair. Lord Giles Rosby tried to keep the conversation civil, inquiring about the well-known features of the North. "Is it true that your winter snows can grow to swallow entire villages?" he asked, sounding both intrigued and horrified. Eddard gave a short nod. "In the hardest winters, yes. The snows can pile so high that no one travels beyond their walls for weeks or months. We stockpile food against those seasons. The castles and keeps become sanctuaries, each self-sufficient." "Nan?" Lord Giles pursed his lips, perhaps wondering how such a vast, harsh land could be managed, or how many men might be hidden if the Starks ever rose again. "Fascinating," he said. "I should very much like to see how you organize those stockpiles." "You shall," Eddard replied. "Your enumerators will have no difficulty verifying that the North takes winter preparations quite seriously." A lull settled over the table after that, and the only sounds were the scrape of utensils, the crackling of torches, and the muffled talk among the lesser lords. Near the other end of the hall, Eddard glimpsed Sir Garin, seated with his Targaryen guards, quietly eating bread and salted beef. The knight's cold eyes drifted around the room, missing nothing. Eddard recalled how Robert had once thrived in feasts, bellowing laughter and pounding the table. Now the memory felt like a knife to the heart. He clenched his jaw, forcing himself to focus on the present. When the meal was done, Eddard rose, politely dismissing everyone so they could rest and prepare for the coming days of audits. Lord Giles and his scribe stood, bowing formally, while the Targaryen soldiers followed them out. The local lords took their leave in small clusters, some heading to the courtyard, others to their chambers. Eddard lingered until the hall was nearly empty, exhaling as he listened to the last footsteps echo off the walls. He left by a side door that opened into a dim corridor. The air here smelled of old stone and extinguished torches. A single candle flickered in a bracket on the wall. Taking it, Eddard walked along, wanting nothing more than the solace of the godswood. Each time his anxieties built up, that was where he found a measure of calm. But as he turned a corner, he nearly collided with one of the enumerators, the scribe named Rhaegar. The man was tall and a bit gaunt, wearing spectacles. He seemed lost, or perhaps exploring. Eddard caught himself. "Apologies. You are Rhaegar, yes?" "No." The man bowed his head. "Lord Stark, forgive me. I was curious about the architecture, the old passageways. I studied some plans of Winterfell before we set out, but your castle is more expansive than I realized." Eddard regarded him, searching for any hint of hidden motive in that mild expression. "It is an ancient fortress, built upon hot springs and expanded over generations. If you'd like a guide, I can arrange one. Otherwise, you might find yourself lost in these halls." Rhaegar smiled nervously. "Yes, actually, I would appreciate a guide. The last thing I want is to wander into some place I shouldn't be." "You and dear." Eddard nodded. "Wait here a moment." He signaled to a passing guard, instructing the man to escort the scribe back to his quarters, or wherever he wished to go in the keep, but to keep an eye on him. The guard inclined his head, leading the enumerator away. Rhaegar offered a bow of thanks and followed, his footsteps echoing until they disappeared. Eddard realized the enumerators would be prowling about, not just in the library or the records room, but in corners of Winterfell he might never have thought to show them. It was unsettling, but he had no choice. To stop them would appear suspicious. He pressed on, determined to reach the godswood. Outside, the night air was cold, a biting wind sweeping across the courtyard. Stars glittered in a clear sky. He pulled his cloak tighter as he entered the thick grove of trees. Darkness enclosed him, and the gentle rustle of leaves reminded him that here, at least, the presence of the old gods remained constant. He approached the heart tree, that pale trunk carved with a sorrowful face. Kneeling at the edge of the small pool, he touched the water's surface. It felt icy against his fingers, and yet it also steadied him. Looking at the reflection of the weirwood's face, Eddard breathed words he could not utter in the presence of men. His fears, his doubts, his guilt for bending the knee and letting Robert's cause die with him. He knew the old gods never spoke back, not in the way a man might, but he felt their ancient witness all the same. He prayed for Lyanna, that she might endure. He prayed for the North, that it might remain strong and unbroken beneath Targaryen rule. And he prayed for himself, that he might have the wisdom to navigate the realm's shifting sands. At length, he rose. A thin layer of moonlight filtered through the canopy, illuminating his breath as a faint mist. With measured steps, he returned to the keep, thinking of the day ahead. He had to oversee the enumerators' work, ensuring they found no excuse to punish Winterfell. He would have to guide them to the granaries, the armories, the storehouses for salted fish and root vegetables. He would have to show them the rosters of his soldiers, including men who had died or never returned from the war. The enumerators would ask questions, counting weapons, horses, the capacity for forging steel. No doubt they would suspect every corner of the north. Eddard felt the burden pressing heavier on his shoulders. He passed the great hall and climbed the steps to his solar. Maester Luwin was within, sealing a letter with a wax stamp. He lifted his gaze as Eddard entered. "My lord, I was just preparing this for dispatch by Raven. It's to Lord Manderley, reassuring him that the enumerators are here on official business only, not to impose new taxes. I hope this quells any restlessness in White Harbor." Eddard nodded in appreciation. "Send it at once. We can't have Manderley stirring discontent." Luwin moved to the raven perch, where a pair of the black birds sat, each with bright eyes glinting in the lantern light. He carefully tied the parchment to one raven's leg and whispered instructions, then released it out the narrow window. The bird vanished into the darkness, wings flapping. Eddard watched it go, thinking how the realm's fate might hinge upon the messages carried by such creatures. Raven by raven, word would spread of the enumerators, of the Targaryen presence, of any sign of defiance. The North, so vast and proud, was under new scrutiny it had not faced in generations. With a tired gesture, Eddard dismissed Luwin to rest. Alone, he unbuckled his sword belt, propping it against the table. The steel glinted softly in the lamplight. His father's sword was entombed in the crypts below, and Brandon's blade lost in King's Landing with him. Eddard's own blade, an unassuming but well-honed longsword, felt like a relic of the war now, used only to maintain order or defend home. He prayed he would not need to draw it in conflict again. He sat heavily in the chair, letting out a breath. His eyes roved across the scattered maps on the table. There was one of the north in detail, marked with roads, mountains, scattered holds. If the enumerators traveled beyond Winterfell to see the other great houses, they might provoke local tensions. Already he pictured House Bolton's men bristling at southern intrusions. And the mountain clans near the Vale border had little love for any outsiders, be they Targaryen or Stark. The enumerators' curiosity could lead them into danger there. Eddard would have to send warnings to keep the peace. So many threads to manage. The next morning arrived too soon. Eddard awoke to the sound of chatter in the courtyard below his window. He dressed quickly and went down. There, he found Lord Giles Rosby in conversation with Barthogan the Castellan. A few scribes behind them, arms laden with fresh parchment. "Duck!" A stable hand led out a pair of horses. Eddard approached. "Good morning, Lord Stark," said Giles. "We hope to begin by touring your storage facilities and then move on to the armories and the smithies. After that, we'll look at the muster rolls your maester has provided." Eddard inclined his head. "Very well. I'll accompany you personally. I trust that's acceptable." He wanted to keep a close eye on them, to ensure no friction arose. Giles smiled, though it was the smile of a man used to playing a role. That would be most welcome. Together, they crossed the yard. A retinue of Targaryen guards joined them, Sir Garin among them, alongside a handful of Stark men-at-arms. The tension was palpable. The local smallfolk watched from a distance, uncertain. Some women whispered behind their hands. A few children peeked out from behind stalls or corners, eyes wide. Eddard could almost hear their thoughts. Why are these strangers here, rummaging through our lord's stores as if they owned them? They started at the granaries. Sacks of barley, wheat, and rye were stacked to the rafters, enough to feed Winterfell's populace through several months of winter, or to sustain an army on the march. The enumerators asked question after question. How many sacks were reserved for immediate use? How many men were employed to grind flour? How quickly these stores could be replenished in the spring? One scribe busily jotted notes. occasionally glancing at Eddard with a faint apology in his eyes, as if he was not entirely comfortable with his own work. Giles asked whether any of these supplies might be sold or traded southward, should the next harvest prove bountiful. Eddard answered with deliberate thoroughness, adopting a neutral tone. We do engage in some trade, but most of what we store is for the castle's use, or for our nearest bannermen. Winters can last years. We must be cautious. Giles nodded. Indeed, caution is wise. He scribbled a note on his parchment. And how many men does Winterfell feed regularly? Eddard gestured around. We have the castle household, which, including servants and guards, is near 300 in peacetime. That number can swell if refugees from smaller holdfasts seek shelter here in winter. The enumerators made more notes. Sir Garin looked on silently, arms folded, scanning the faces of the peasants who peered in from the door. Finally, the group moved on to the storerooms for salted meats and fish. Barrels lined the walls, carefully salted or smoked to preserve the provisions. The scribes dipped measuring sticks into a few barrels, withdrew them, and made further calculations. Eddard felt his patience wearing thin, but he reminded himself that compliance was the safest path. When they reached the smithy, the blacksmith, Mikken, stood at his forge with a hammer in hand. Sparks danced as he worked a piece of iron. He glanced up under bushy eyebrows, his face smudged with soot. Mikken was a short man but broad-shouldered, and he frowned at the enumerators with undisguised suspicion. Eddard gave him a small nod, hoping to convey that he should cause no trouble. "Smith," asked Giles, "how many weapons do you produce in a month's time?" Mikken shrugged, gruff. "Depends on what's needed. Horseshoes mostly, some axes and swords. I can only work as fast as the metal and my arms allow." Giles pressed on, a faint condescension in his voice. "Do you keep a record of how many swords have been commissioned by Lord Stark or his men since the rebellion ended?" Mikken scratched at his stubbled chin. "A record? No. We keep what we call a tally mark on the ledger. Maybe a sword or two every fortnight. Sometimes less. Got no reason to churn out blades day and night, not unless there's war, which there ain't. So I hear." "Ah." Sir Garin's gaze flicked to Eddard, as though anticipating an outburst. Eddard kept his face composed. "You'll find no hidden forges if that's your concern. Winterfell is not preparing for renewed war." Giles nodded slowly, scribbling notes in his ledger again. "We must be certain. After all, the crown was recently threatened by a large-scale rebellion. Our duty is to ensure no such threat remains." Mikken scowled but kept hammering away, biting back any words that might land him in the dungeon if overheard. Eddard guided the enumerators on, taking them next to the main armory where surplus weapons were stored. There, racks of spears, shields, and swords lined the walls, all neatly maintained, though dust lingered on some older sets of armor that had belonged to men who had marched south and never returned. The enumerators meticulously counted each piece, asking how many had been lost in the war, how many were replaced, how frequently the armory was restocked. Eddard answered with forced calm, even as he felt his anger prickling. They questioned him with more intensity here than they had at the granaries. At last, the enumerators appeared satisfied with the day's inspection. By late afternoon, they retreated to their assigned rooms to compile notes and compare tallies. Eddard parted from them, feeling as if he'd endured an interrogation. His own men dispersed. He glimpsed Jory shaking his head in annoyance, while Roderick Castle muttered something under his breath about the crown's arrogance. But all of them had obeyed Eddard's instructions, keeping tempers in check. That evening, Eddard again retired to his solar, letting out a weary breath when he closed the door behind him. He could hear the murmur of voices through the walls, likely the enumerators conferring in the adjoining chambers. The constant proximity of these strangers made Winterfell feel cramped and claustrophobic in a way Eddard had never experienced. He crossed to his table, where Maester Luwin stood with a fresh letter in hand. "A raven from the Eyrie, my lord," Luwin said. "Lord Arryn writes." Eddard's heart lifted slightly at the thought of Jon Arryn, his foster father of sorts, a man whose counsel he trusted. He took the letter and read, scanning the neat lines. "My dear Ned, I hear from reliable sources that enumerators have reached Winterfell. They are here as well, prying into the Vale's fortifications, our grain stores and the rosters of our knights. There is little we can do but cooperate. We are both bound by our oaths. But I fear King Aerys is not content. Rumors persist that he seeks scapegoats to remind the realm of his power. Take great care. Prince Rhaegar's influence offers some restraint, but the Mad King's whims remain dangerous. I miss our days in the Vale. Simpler times when you and Robert roamed these halls, full of laughter and mischief. That laughter is gone now. Guard yourself and your people. I remain your friend, always. Jon Arryn. Eddard closed his eyes, feeling an old ache stir at the mention of Robert's name. Once again, he pictured that fierce grin, those broad shoulders swinging the warhammer. He could almost hear Robert's hearty laughter echoing through the airy stone halls. Gone, gone. And Aerys Targaryen still ruled, devouring the kingdom from his iron seat. Eddard handed the letter to Luwin, then lowered himself into a chair with a quiet groan. He was only a man, and he felt the exhaustion in his bones. Luwin placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "Would you like me to draft a reply to Lord Arryn?" "Yes," Eddard said softly, rubbing a hand across his brow. "Tell him we face the same predicament, that I will remain vigilant, and ask if he knows anything of Rhaegar's further plans, particularly whether the prince means to tighten his grip on the north, or if he has spoken of my sister, Menetrol." Luwin nodded gravely. "Eight once, my lord." He moved to the writing desk, lighting a small lamp. The scratch of his quill soon filled the silence as he composed Eddard's response on a fresh piece of parchment. Eddard stared at the flicker of the lamplight, lost in his own swirling thoughts. When the letter was finished, he read it over, sealed it, and watched the maester attach it to another raven. With a flutter of black wings, the bird took flight into the night sky. Eddard wondered how many ravens had carried stories of the rebellion that Robert and he had once believed unstoppable. How many had soared over fields of the dead, bearing news of the war's sudden and bitter end. Exhaling, he left Luwin to tidy the desk and descended into the corridors once more. He passed a few enumerators along the way, each giving him a respectful bow. Behind that courtesy, Eddard could sense the tension. These men had a job to do, and a single misstep could mean dire consequences for Winterfell. Down in the great hall, a few of his own men gathered around the central fire, sharing cups of ale and quiet conversation. Eddard joined them briefly, greeting them with a nod, feeling their unspoken question. How long will this ordeal last? He offered them a thin smile. "One day at a time," he said simply, and they nodded in solemn agreement. Later, he found himself climbing the stairs to the ramparts, wanting to gaze out over the walls at the north's moonlit expanse. A crisp wind blew against him when he stepped onto the walkway. Torchlight flickered from the watchtowers, illuminating the stony battlements. He walked along, eventually stopping at a vantage point that overlooked King's Road stretching southward. The silhouette of pine forests under the moon reminded him that beyond this pocket of tension, the land was vast, rugged, and free in its own silent way. A voice spoke behind him. Roderick Castle, quietly stepping closer. "My lord, I thought I'd find you here." Eddard turned with a weary smile. "Roderick, I needed air." Roderick gazed out at the distant darkness. "Hard times these. The men grumble, but they obey. We all know there's no sense in stirring a fight now." "Yes. For once, inaction is the bravest path," Eddard murmured, "though it chafes at my pride and my conscience." Roderick frowned sympathetically. "Is there any word of your sister?" Eddard hesitated, recalling the letter from Rhaegar that had mentioned Lyanna's restlessness. "Only that she's in Dorne, guarded by Rhaegar's men. Possibly content, possibly not. I don't know." Roderick put a hand on the hilt of his sword, face troubled. "If she is captive." Eddard shook his head. "I dare not label her so. Rhaegar claims he loves her. And if she truly is his wife, the situation is more complex than mere captivity. But I cannot see her. Not yet. The realm is too fragile." "Why?" Roderick sighed. "I pray the gods watch over her. She always had such spirit." Yes, she did, Eddard said softly. He pictured her laugh. The way she danced around the courtyard with a flower crown perched precariously on her hair. It hurt to remember. The present felt so dark in comparison. They stood a moment in silence, the wind ruffling their cloaks. Then, Roderick clasped Eddard's shoulder. "Get some rest, my lord. Tomorrow will be another day of the crown counting our spoons." "No." Eddard managed a faint chuckle at the wry joke. Likely so." "Good night, Roderick." When he finally returned to his chamber, he found the hearth fire still glowing faintly. He sank onto the bed, letting his mind wander, drifting into a half-sleep where memories mingled with worries. In one half-formed dream, he saw Robert Baratheon, clad in mail, warhammer raised, laughing as he crushed a phantom foe. Then the dream shifted, and Eddard stood on a red shore, water lapping at his ankles, rubies glittering in the shallows, Rhaegar's rubies spilled from his armor. A voice called to him, faint and distant. He turned, and he saw Lyanna standing alone under a weirwood tree, tears on her cheeks. Her lips moved, but he could not hear her words. The heartbreak in her eyes was all too clear. He woke with a start, sweat at his brow, the hearth fire reduced to coals. Dawn light seeped around the shutters. Another day, another test of patience. Eddard rose, washed, and dressed. Outside, as he expected, the enumerators were already at work. The day fell into a pattern. They questioned bartisans, stableboys, huntsmen, and watchmen. They carefully recorded the number of hounds in Winterfell's kennels, as if that too mattered. Eddard grimly followed their progress, stepping in whenever tension flared between a suspicious Northman and an overzealous scribe. Midday found him in the library with Rorin, showing the old rosters from past decades. How many men House Stark could muster in emergencies? How many knights? How many foot soldiers? Rorin seemed almost apologetic, but he persisted in asking questions, eyes darting anxiously to Eddard's stoic features. In the afternoon, they visited the old crypts beneath Winterfell. Eddard only permitted a cursory inspection there, explaining that the dead were to be left in peace. Lord Giles insisted on a quick look, as if worried weapons or hidden caches might be stored among the tombs. Eddard guided them down with torches in hand, the cool, damp air pressing in on them. The enumerators glanced uneasily at the statues of past Stark lords, each with a stone direwolf at their feet and a sword across their lap. A hush seemed to fall over the group. The scribes made no jokes here, no pointed remarks. They simply shivered, scanning the dark corridors lined with the dead. Satisfied there was nothing of interest, they retreated hastily, sighing in relief when they climbed back into the daylight. That evening, Eddard found the enumerators conferring with Ser Garin in a side chamber near the Great Hall. He overheard snippets of their conversation, mentions of weapon counts, stored grain, the readiness of the men-at-arms. They paused when he entered, their voices faltering. Eddard addressed them politely. "Have you all you need, my lords?" Giles Rosby cleared his throat. "We are compiling our notes. Tomorrow we might wish to inspect the stables more thoroughly, to note how many war horses or riding horses you possess, how many could be fitted with armor. Also, if there are any couriers who ride swiftly for distant holds, we'd like to see how many messages can be dispatched at once." "Matter war." Eddard inclined his head. "As you wish. I'll see you in the morning." He left them to their work. From the corner of his eye, he glimpsed Ser Garen's intense stare, like a hawk. The Targaryen knight seemed to expect Eddard might rally men behind the enumerators' backs at any second. Eddard wondered if Ser Garen had lost comrades in the war, men killed by Stark bannermen. The memory of such things could breed hate that no peace treaty could erase. Perhaps that was why Rhaegar had stationed Garen in Winterfell, to keep a hawk's eye on the subdued rebels. Night came again. Instead of seeking the Godswood, Eddard found himself restless, descending the steps to the crypts alone. The torch he carried revealed the old stone faces in flickering shadows. His father, Rickard Stark, who had died by the Mad King's flames. His brother Brandon, hot-headed and doomed. Farther down, empty places remained for future generations. Eddard paused at Brandon's crypt. In the gloom, the stone likeness seemed both eerily lifelike and utterly distant. He thought of how Brandon had been betrothed to Catelyn Tully, how he had been so confident that he would marry and continue the Stark line. All that was dashed in King's Landing. Eddard lowered his torch, letting the light play across the carved figure. He whispered an apology to his brother for failing to avenge him properly, for kneeling to the same crown that had murdered him. But in the end, Eddard had chosen life for the North over vengeance. A skittering sound disturbed his reverie. He looked back to see a rat scuttling along the crypt floor, vanishing into darkness. The calm hush of the tomb returned. Eddard stayed a while, letting the stillness envelop him, feeling the silent judgment of his ancestors. When at last he climbed out, the cold night wind welcomed him. Above, the moon rode high, ringed by a faint halo of light. He wondered if that was an omen. The old ways were often full of portents, but he had little time for superstition now. He slept fitfully, dreaming again of rubies and blood. Dawn came, and the enumerators resumed their painstaking work. By midday, Eddard thought he spied a flicker of satisfaction in Lord Giles' bearing, as though they were nearing the end of their audit. He prayed it would be so. That afternoon they finished with the stables, counting each horse and speaking with the stablemaster in excruciating detail. Then, to Eddard's relief, the enumerators announced that they had enough information to compile their final report. "We will spend tomorrow drafting our conclusion," Giles told him. "Perhaps by evening we can present it to you for review. After that, we will send a copy to King's Landing. If all is in order, we'll depart." "So." Eddard nodded, concealing how much he longed to see them right away. "I'll make sure you have space and peace to complete your work." True to his word, Eddard had a large table set up in a side hall, providing the enumerators with plenty of writing materials. Maester Luwin offered to assist them in clarifying any local terms or references. The scribe seemed grateful, scribbling away behind closed doors for hours. Eddard spent those hours dealing with more local issues, hearing from a few lesser lords about disputes over taxes. He dreaded the possibility that the enumerators' final recommendations might increase the crown's demands on the North, but he could do nothing about it now. By nightfall, Giles emerged from the hall, ink staining his fingers. He found Eddard by the great hearth in the main hall, warming himself and sharing a mug of ale with Jory and Roderick. Giles bowed. "We have a preliminary draft, Lord Stark. If you wish, we can discuss it now or wait until the morrow." Eddard stood. "Let us speak now. The sooner we have clarity, the better." Now was Janie. They moved to a smaller room where a single lantern hung from a chain, casting a subdued glow. Giles unrolled a parchment covered in dense writing. His voice carried a hint of pride as he began summarizing. "We have found no immediate evidence of hidden armories or mustering for rebellion. Your supplies match your claims. The number of weapons in Winterfell's armory appears consistent with a lordly household of this size. Your rosters indicate that House Stark can field a sizable force, though still depleted from the recent war." "No, Zadon." Eddard listened carefully, noticing how Giles' tone remained cautious. "In short, my lord, you are in compliance with the Crown's directive. We will note that no further penalties or watchful measures are required, beyond the standard garrison presence already assigned to Winterfell." Eddard inclined his head. "I see." Giles pursed his lips. "However, we recommend that you provide an updated tally of your bannermen's armies within 6 months. The Crown wants a more comprehensive view of the North as a whole. We cannot possibly visit every holdfast, so we rely on you to gather that data. If a single house is found withholding information..." Eddard nodded. "I understand. I'll do what I can to collect that information. But the North is vast, and some of my bannermen live in remote areas. It may take time." "Time will be granted, within reason," Giles said. "But do not delay excessively." Eddard exhaled, feeling a measure of relief that the enumerators had found nothing to fault. He wondered if they might still twist their findings, but at least on paper, Winterfell was safe. "Is that your full report?" Giles tapped the parchment. "It is our draft. Tomorrow morning we will finalize it. You may keep a copy. The original goes to King's Landing to be reviewed by Prince Rhaegar and the King's Small Council." Eddard said, Then I thank you for your diligence. Winterfell will remain loyal. We have no wish to provoke the crown further." Giles nodded, and for a moment, his guarded expression softened. "I confess, Lord Stark, that I worried we would find disloyalty in every corner. But your people have been forthcoming, if not always cheerful about it." Eddard managed a faint smile. "We are not a naturally cheerful folk. The cold shapes our temperaments, but we are not oath-breakers." They spoke a little longer, finalizing the next day's plan. Then Giles departed, leaving Eddard alone with his thoughts. He paced the small room, the lantern's glow throwing his shadow against the wall. The enumerators had nearly finished. Soon, they would leave, and perhaps Winterfell could breathe again. Yet the knowledge that the crown would continue to demand rosters from him, even while Rhaegar insisted on a fragile peace, weighed heavily. It was not an end so much as a pause. That night, Eddard refused to dwell on the enumerators any further. He returned to the Godswood, seeking the comfort of the old gods once more. He knelt by the heart tree, the reflection of moonlight on the still pool casting a dappled pattern across the carved face. "We are still prisoners," he murmured. "Even if the cage is wide, we remain watched. Help me guide the north." Noir. A soft wind stirred the leaves, making the weirwood branches rustle like whispers. The hush enveloped him. In that hush, Eddard remembered Rhaegar's letter, the promise that Lyanna might one day visit the north under guard. He felt his heart twist. If she did come, it would be to a land overshadowed by Targaryen watchers, enumerators, and suspicion. Still, to have her close, even under constraint, would be better than wondering day and night whether she was truly free. He bowed his head, wishing he could ask the old gods for a sign. Instead, he only found silence. In the morning, the enumerators gathered their final notes, bound their parchment with ribbons, and met with Eddard one last time in a small ceremony that felt formal and perfunctory. Giles handed over a copy of their main findings, recited a few parting words about how the North should remain vigilant in its loyalty, and expressed gratitude for Winterfell's hospitality. Eddard responded politely, though his voice lacked warmth. Ser Garin stood nearby, seemingly ready to escort them south at once. Perhaps the Targaryen knight was just as eager to rid Winterfell of any potential for open hostilities, or perhaps he was relieved that nothing amiss had been discovered. In the courtyard, horses were readied. Scribes loaded their chests of parchment onto a wagon. Northmen watched from a distance, arms folded. The enumerators attempted a few courteous farewells to the stable hands, receiving mostly curt nods in reply. Eddard walked with them to the gates, flanked by his guard. Giles and Roran both made final bows. "We shall take our leave," Giles said. "Once we deliver our report, your compliance will be noted. The crown hopes for continued peace." "Ace do we all," Eddard replied. He looked past them, down the King's Road. "A safe journey, my lords." The enumerators mounted up. Ser Garin led the escort, forming a protective cordon around the wagons. With that, the party set off, hooves clopping on the ground. Eddard stood at the gates, watching until they vanished into the distance, their red dragon banners growing ever smaller. Only then did he exhale a long breath. For the first time in weeks, the courtyard felt as though it belonged to Winterfell again. Yet a handful of Targaryen soldiers remained behind. The official garrison was not departing. Eddard's eyes drifted to the sight of their black and red surcoats near the gatehouse. The watchers who would stay to ensure no rebellion stirred. He turned away, determined to face this new reality with whatever resilience he could muster. Days passed more quietly after the enumerator's departure. Eddard directed men to resume normal routines. The stablemaster let out a sigh of relief that no one was counting his pitchforks anymore. The blacksmith hammered away, forging horseshoes with a bit more gusto, no longer scowling at suspicious outsiders. Even the servants seemed more at ease, singing snatches of old songs in the corridors. The atmosphere lightened, though the Targaryen presence was still there, an undeniable reminder that Winterfell was under watchful eyes. A fortnight later, a new raven arrived from King's Landing. The letter bore the prince's seal again. Eddard broke the wax and read, "Lord Stark, we have received the enumerator's reports. I commend you for your cooperation. My father is satisfied for now that the North is not preparing to rise in arms. I trust you will continue to keep the peace. In some months' time, I intend to summon the great lords of the realm to King's Landing for an event meant to commemorate unity. I invite you to come, representing the North, to swear renewed vows of loyalty before all gathered. This is not an order, but a request. I believe showing a united front will calm lingering fears. On a private note, I intend soon to travel to Dorne again, to visit my lady wife. Lyanna asks after you, wondering how fares her home. I ask you keep faith with the realm, and you shall see her again under happier circumstances. Rhaegar Targaryen. Eddard folded the letter, a heaviness pressing on him. Another gathering in King's Landing, under the watchful gaze of Aerys Targaryen. How would that end? The realm might see it as a sign of forced submission, or it might see it as a genuine attempt at peace. If Eddard refused, it could look like defiance. If he went, he would be bending the knee yet again in a public display. He thought of Jon Arryn, of the letter that had warned him to be cautious. Perhaps this was part of Rhaegar's strategy to maintain stability, while the Mad King hovered in the shadows. He stared at the flame in the hearth, recalling the day he had knelt in the mud at the Trident, Robert's corpse cooling in the shallow water. Nothing was the same after that. Nothing would ever be the same. He closed his eyes. The North had survived the enumerator's scrutiny, but the realm's future remained precarious. One day at a time. One choice at a time. Rising, he handed the letter to Maester Luwin. "Draft a reply," he said quietly. "Tell Prince Rhaegar I will consider his invitation. For now, I must tend to the North, and send my regards to Lyanna, that she is not forgotten, and that Winterfell awaits her with open arms." Luwin bowed, leaving to fulfill his task. Eddard stood by the window, gazing at the courtyard where a few Targaryen soldiers paced, spears in hand. Above them, the Stark banners flew, a gray direwolf on a field of white. Two symbols layered upon the same ground, the direwolf in the sky, the dragon in the yard. Perhaps that was the image of the new realm. He placed a hand on the cold stone sill, imagining the old gods watching from the heart tree, seeing all the changes that time brought to these ancient lands. Slowly, Eddard turned away from the window. Duty called always. He would make decisions for the North, maintain calm, and protect his people as best he could. Even if that meant living under the dragon's shadow. Even if that meant enduring the memory of Robert's death in every quiet moment. Even if it meant 1,000 more submissions, until the realm found a true and lasting peace, or until some new conflict rose on the horizon. No one could know which. For now, Eddard Stark steeled himself, because winter was never far away, and the kingdom balanced on a thin blade between order and chaos. He would do his part, with all the strength left in him, for love of the North and for the memory of the friend he had lost.